Welcome to dojo.live, the place where top minds in travel and hospitality check in to share insights and breakthroughs shaping the industry. Brought to you by Encora, your trusted partner for AI, cloud, and data-driven innovation. Enjoy your stay. Hello and welcome to another episode of Dojo Live this Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. It's here on Dojo Live that we have candid conversations with industry leaders tackling the biggest tech challenges in travel and hospitality. I am your host, Kim Lantis, and today we are diving into episode number 2 of our series, Powering Hospitality, Insights from Hospitality's PMS Leaders. Joining me as co-host is Sridhar Padmanabhan. Sridhar, welcome.
Thank you, Kim. Great to be here.
Great to be here. What are you excited to dig into today?
I mean, the future PMS's Cloudbeds is always at the top of my list. Always great to hear what's going on.
I love it. I love it. Very well said, because today we are breaking down why hospitality PMS needs a new playbook and how the all-in-one versus hub-and-spoke debate might be holding the industry back. Helping us to explore this new way forward is, in PMS technology specifically, is Josh Graham, Head of Market Development at Cloudbeds. Josh, welcome back. Good to see you again.
So great to see the two of you as always. It's always a fun time getting to come on Dojo, and really looking forward to today's topics for sure.
It is. Thank you. Thank you. And as you said, I believe coming into the show, it's going to be a spicy conversation. But as we kick these things off, I'd like for you to share just a bit about your background for those of our audience who might not yet know you, your role at Cloudbeds, and your passion, I guess, for innovation in the hospitality tech industry.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I think sort of my passion for innovation and a little of my story kind of intersect here. So I've been in hospitality for about 30 years. I spent a decade or so on the ops end of the business, and then moved over to the technology side in 2007 when I started working for TravelClick. Had a wide variety of different roles in TravelClick. Got to work with CRS, CRM, business intelligence, e-commerce, and distribution, digital marketing. Then I worked in a series of revenue management companies, as well as spending some time at Salesforce. Noticeably absent from that list, though, is any time on the PMS side. It's sort of funny. As I was looking for a new role, talking to some mentors, I said, well, I've worked in lots of different areas, and I don't ever want to work for a PMS company. And it's funny because I think working for Cloudbeds, in some ways, I still don't work for a PMS company. And I say that not because we're not a PMS company, but because the challenges that I've dealt with, I've faced dealing with PMS companies over the years, as I've worked with systems that have had to integrate into PMSs. PMSs were always, not always, but have often been a blocker to a lot of the advancements in technology, in hospitality technology. And so when I started talking to the folks at Cloudbeds, our co-founders, different people in the organization, I very rapidly realized that the way that Cloudbeds looks at innovation and how we can change the game in the market is dramatically different than any other PMS company I had worked with or previously. And so that approach, that desire to really look at things differently aligns very well with my passion for innovation in hospitality tech.
Amazing. And it aligns really well with what we're going to be talking about today, because it's this debate between the all-in-one PMS platforms and the hub and spoke model, and how that's kind of an ongoing thing. Let's break it down a little bit for the audience. First, if you could give us, specifically me here, simple definitions for dummies, right? Let's pretend we've neither heard of the all-in-one approach or the hub and spoke approach before. Kind of what are they? And then second, how did we get here? If you could provide maybe a brief history of PMS and why the industry has moved maybe toward this platform platformization. Did I say that right? Say that 10 times fast. Model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I think if we start off with the history a little bit first, right? Might kind of explain some of these things. So PMSs, along with the CRS systems, were sort of the first set of hospitality technology systems to be digitized, right? As we enter that digitization era. And it made a lot of sense. They were, the systems of record, the centralized systems, CRS systems had already been digitized in airline space. It's you can think of it that way. And so as decisions were being made about how to build out these systems, one of what I sometimes refer to as the original sin of hospitality technology was committed, right? And it's understandable why the decision was made at the time. But that original sin was this model and this approach of using a reservation record as the data brick on which everything else was built, right? Rather than a guest profile. So if we think about it from that one decision, which again made sense at the time, and we extrapolate out, that is when the whole idea of data fragmentation started happening, because you were centralizing your data around that reservation. As a matter of fact, there were some early PMS systems where you would literally have to attach guest profiles to reservation records, right? And so if we think about it in that context, it all sort of starts to make sense.
Yeah, so this very temporary thing.
Right, exactly. And so as technology then continued to develop, right, you had these PMS systems that were built around that. And I think it's also worth thinking about what exactly historically has a PMS system been, right? It is a accounting system that tracks the flow of money and people around a property, right? I mean, there's other things, but that's the core part of it, right? And so as PMSs historically built out features and functionality around that, but they didn't really inherently have the concept or the idea of guest profiles or what to do with them. You then saw this rise of hospitality technology around it to start filling in all the gaps, right? Everything from upselling to housekeeping and maintenance management to sales and catering, all of these things. Now, all of these other systems, of course, had to tie back to the PMS system, right? Because that PMS system was the ultimate source of truth, the final record, for all of the data. But so that led to essentially the creation of PMSs in the hub and spoke. So if we think of it there, you've got the PMS as the hub. Some people refer to it as the heart, right? And then all of these other systems that connect to them. And that's when you saw the rise of the large scale hospitality tech stack, where hotels would have to not only make a PMS decision, but then make a decision on all these other pieces of technology, source those, purchase them, implement them, and manage through them, right? And so for a while, that was sort of your status quo for PMSs. PMS systems then started saying, okay, we can build booking engines and we can do all these other things. But again, if we look back to when PMS started doing those, and you think of the go-to-market motions for most PMS systems at the time, they were essentially capital expenses, right? Mm-hmm. PMSs were never set up as SaaS businesses to begin with. So a PMS was something that a hotel bought every 3 to 5 years if they didn't also need to replace their carpets, their soft goods in the rooms, or do some pop-up renovation, right? And so as a result, if you think about that, the incentive to innovate was less and less for a lot of PMS companies at the time, right? Because they knew that they were only getting that other sale every 3 to 5 years. And so they looked to other ways to create revenue streams. Sometimes they would monetize connectivity. Yes, you can integrate anything with this system, but there's going to be a fee for every time you connect, right? And so as a result, that's when you started seeing the rise of some all-in-one systems, because smaller hotels said, wait a minute. I need a PMS. I get that. I'm, a 20, 30 room hotel. I need a PMS system to manage things efficiently and effectively. But now I have to go out and do all of these other things. So you started seeing rise of a newer crop of PMS systems. And I promise I'll stop the history lesson. I feel like I'm in one of those boring history lectures.
I'm intrigued.
Right? But where you had hotels say, wait, I don't like, I can't handle finding 30 vendors and dealing with all of this. So you had a new crop of PMS vendors that came up and said, wait, we can not only do the PMS, but we can do booking engine and do it right. We can do websites, we can do it right. We can do onward distribution, plugging in a channel manager. We can help you with digital marketing, and we can do all of these things, and it puts everything in one box. And so that is where you sort of had this original, creation of the all-in-one versus the hub and spoke model.
Okay. So this makes a lot of sense. We have this definition or this idea that neither the all-in-one or the hub and spoke is potentially the right choice, or maybe the false choice today as it stands. So what's this third way? Is there a third way?
Well, absolutely. And so, as you look out there, right? One of the reasons that I love the hospitality space is that it's incredibly diverse, right? Hospitality or a hotel can mean, a 5-room property on a beach in Thailand. It can mean a 40-room eco lodge in the Arabian desert, right? It can mean a 1,000-room mega convention resort, in a Gaylord property, right? In outside of Denver. I mean, and everything in between. And so when we think about this idea that you have 2 options for that variety, it just doesn't ring true to me. And so when we think about all-in-one versus hub and spoke, and people talk about this quite a lot, right? The typical idea was that, well, all-in-ones are good for small hotels, and hub and spokes are good for larger groups or enterprise, right? And that was the idea. But you're not asking the right question, because why can't you have both in one platform? Because there are undeniably advantages to both approaches, right? All-in-one is simpler, it's easier. A hub and spoke allows people to pick and choose and find the best in breed solutions, where people are, at the cutting edge of innovation and, in all of these different areas, and tie them all together. But you can have a platform that has that functionality, basic level functionality built into it. And that basic level functionality might be a fit for a certain group of hotels, and at the same time has the partnerships and the integrations that then enable you to plug in best of breed vendors when you need. So I'm not saying to a hotel company, you have to use my on-platform capability, and you don't have to use somebody else for everything. So when we look at partnerships, we have partnerships with amazing CRM companies. We are launching CRM ourselves. Is our CRM going to be, have every feature and functionality that our partners have? Absolutely not, right? But is it going to be a fit for some properties? Yes. And you can go down the line with different pieces of functionality, and that's the third way.
Okay, so I'm an analogy person. I'm thinking of this as like the model now is like a multivitamin, it's going to work, it's going to function and cover all the bases. But maybe, I have a little bit of higher cholesterol. So in addition to my multivitamin, I'm actually going to focus and take an omega-3 pill as well. And it's not going to cause any trouble with the multivitamin that I'm taking, right? That kind
listen,
of idea.
As someone who loves analogies, that's a pretty good one. The one that I've been using is might be a little trite, but it's actually, think of like an iPhone, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can take an iPhone and I can give it to my mother, right, in her 70s, who's not as inherently comfortable with technology as I may be, and she can use what comes on the phone. She'll use Safari, she'll use Apple Maps, she'll use iMessage, everything. She doesn't download a lot of apps, right? It has what she needs. Now I can take that same iPhone and give it to my older teenager, because I don't think young kids should have cell phones. Here's a spicy take. Don't let your kids under 16 get on social media.
I agree. Currently, the thorn in my side with my 13-year-old daughter, who strongly disagrees.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, my 12-year-old has a cell phone that belongs to me that they then have to like take off the counter when they go to school and then put it back on the counter when they come back from school. But that's a whole different podcast. So I can take that same iPhone, give it to my teenager, and they will immediately install a million custom themes. They will install a whole bunch of different apps. They will make that phone do exactly what they want it to do, how they want it to do, how they want to do it, right? It's the same phone. And so I think when we think of like, what is our overarching approach, that's one of the things that we draw inspiration from.
Yep.
It makes sense.
Yeah, Josh, I think listening to you, the stacks have developed, from legacy to SaaS options and all that. So there must be a whole bunch of properties, independents, smaller chains that are trying to navigate, hey, do I go from here to here? I had this on-prem, I have these facilities on the cloud. I mean, what have you seen customers kind of grapple with as they are looking at this landscape? For example, right? I mean, they have both a flip phone and an iPhone, and they're like, all right, I have all this here, now what? So
yeah. And look, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, those kinds of changes are big fundamental changes. I mean, we joke about, the PMS is the heart of the hotel. Some people have said changing a PMS is like open heart surgery. I don't disagree. It affects a lot of things, right? There is always pain with change. That is, that you always have to figure out, where is the tech debt that you're going to have to pay when you have change. This is always the case, right? And look, the industry has gone through multiple cycles of upheaval over the last several years, right? Not just the big things like COVID, but even before that, right? And so, people are, like often wary, we're finally making money. Why do I have to make these investments? Or, I'm finally making money and now things look uncertain and unstable because the world order seems to be changing. I mean, there's always a reason not to. And so the question is, what are the reasons that they should? And in my opinion, no surprise, the reasons for change outweigh, right? Because when you start to move off of those legacy platforms, whole new worlds open up, right? And this is one of the things that the brick walls that I run into quite willingly sometimes, because I think they need to be broken down. I've said for years that hoteliers need to stop evaluating systems strictly on a basis, like a matrix of how many features do I get and how much does it cost? There's a third sort of overarching criteria that hoteliers should be using when they evaluate systems, and that is, how well does that platform or that system intake or share data with other systems. And a system that does one thing really well and doesn't share data with other systems should rate lower than a system that might not have every piece of functionality, right? And look, this is a common problem. I mean, how often, just think of our own lives, do we go and we look to buy a new car and we're like, wow, those heated seats, like that's such a cool feature. And you're like, wait, but I live in Florida. Do I really need heated seats for the 3 days a year that it's a low temperature, right? And so you run into the PMS technology equivalents of people asking for heated seats all the time.
All the time. I understand.
I think that's a really great idea of what hoteliers need to be asking, how they need to make, that evaluation to ensure sort of a smooth and even beneficial switch. Curious if you have any other kind of tips as to how to, go about that evaluation process and make that switch, but also a success story perhaps of a property that has sort of transformed its operations by adopting a more modern PMS, lessons that other hoteliers might be able to take from that success story.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, I mean, it's been a while since I was on the operations end of the business. So I sometimes, I recognize that what I'm about to say is something that may or may not be taken very well. But sometimes I think you have to look at all of your processes, and hoteliers often have built up workarounds and ways of doing things to overcome shortcomings for so long that those workarounds have become SOPs or processes, right? And so the first thing I do is if you're looking at changing a system as fundamental as PMS, you should be looking at a lot of your processes. What can be done differently? What can be done more efficiently? And if you have a system that might not do everything the way your current system does, understand that there are certain things that might be showstoppers, right? They're like, okay, listen, if it doesn't do this, that's just we can't go any further with this system. But if a system is solving 85%, making 85% of your life better, right? But you're saying, but this other 15%, I'm going to have to change some things. You need to take a hard look, right, at whether those 15% use cases are really things that are critical to your business, or do the benefits on the other side outweigh the losses, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's really a key thing, because when you look to upgrade to a modern PMS, it's not just about features and functionality. It's about things like UX. It's about things like being able to train your staff faster, right? It's about which is a huge labor cost and savings cost. And look, the economic environment for labor has not gotten that much better since COVID, right? We're still facing problems. And so there are all of these knock-on effects. And so Kimberly, you talked about like some success stories. So, at the risk of sounding passe, I've got lots of them, right? But I can think of, for example, a small property in Texas called La Palmilla that works with us, that is because of the technology that we have, has been able to reevaluate their entire staffing model. A lot of their folks work remote. And by remote, I mean many of their guest contact team members are located in the Philippines. They have a significantly smaller number of people on property because using our technology enables folks who are sitting in the Philippines to do work that typically would require someone to be on property for. Maintenance management, all of these different things. And they also use some of our integration partners to fill in the gaps where we don't have the technology for them at this point. So, they work with a number of different partners to do that. And so, whether it's folks like that, or TTM Hospitality is another company that's really seen some great results, that talks about how intuitive our UX is, how we take really complex processes or processes that are often complex, like connecting to different OTA channels, and makes that a lot easier. I think of groups like HP Hospitality, which is down in the Florida Keys, And our multi-property view, which enables users with access at one property, to see availability and make reservations, without even leaving their main screen. So if somebody walks into one of their properties in the Keys and they don't have a room, they can immediately find them a room at another property closer by. So things like that.
All right. Awesome. The placement of your episode today is like perfect, I think, in what we've got going on in this series, because yesterday we were talking just about the simplicity or the necessity of a PMS to be simple, right? For the usability side, and mainly on the staff side and the training side and all of those benefits. And then tomorrow we're going to be reaching on into the interoperability side and like the benefits of data of when all of these systems are speaking together. And so it's a perfect conversation. Shridhar, I'm sure you've got much more that you'd like to speak to Josh about.
I think, Josh, as things are changing, there are new hotels or new properties that are getting built up, and or even new ownership, and they may have new choices, and then you have all of these things coming. So as what do you see coming up down the pike in terms of features, or in terms of where do you see the industry, hospitality operations? I mean, the example you just gave, so many people doing things remotely. I was like, wow, I did not know that. That's fine. Amazing to hear. So what else do you see changing?
Yeah, so I think, it's interesting. I see a couple of, first of all, larger trends that will then have some very specific impacts. So, Kimberly and Shridhar, one of the things we talked about the history of PMS, and what is a PMS, right? I said it's an accounting system that tracks the flow of money and people around a property, but it's also something much more than that. And I haven't touched on this yet. It is the interaction layer, right? In which most guest-facing team members work, right? And now that's a really interesting idea, because when we think of interaction layers, we think of good UX, we think of things that go smoothly. If I tell you specialized accounting systems, that does not conjure images of, oh, that's easy to use, right? And that's been the fundamental challenge, is that if you typically think about PMS, right? You go, oh yeah, that's the system, and that's why my front desk clerks all do this, right? Hi, I'm a guest, I'm coming to check in, and all I'm seeing is the bald spot on the top of the front desk clerk's head, right? Sorry, that's just me, I apologize. But like we think of a system that doesn't enable our guest contact members to have these kinds of conversations. These ones, right? And that's sort of a fundamental disconnect between one purpose of the system and the other use of the system is another one of the original sins, right, of hospitality technology. Because as all of this other technology evolved around the PMS, right, the PMS systems that were out there at the time didn't really evolve in a way that they could make the data in all of these systems actionable to the people that need it the most. Front desk teams, your concierge teams, your reservations teams that are in the PMS, even your housekeeping and food and beverage teams, right? And so if you think about the implications of that, even if you're a hospitality company who's done everything right, and you've taken this, you've built and curated this 40 vendor tech stack with your best in breed solutions across the thing, and you go, whoa, I've got data in 40 places. So you bring in CRM, CDP type solutions, and you unify your data, right? You've got all your data cleaned up. How many front desk people do you know that have access to a CRM or CDP environment? None, nada, zero, zip, zilch, pick your term, right? So even if you've unified your data, you've reduced your silos, even if you've reduced it to 2 silos, the fact that the PMS is the interaction layer and doesn't have access to the data in your unified data environment, you didn't solve anything. You still have the problem. So there's my setup for what I see coming.
Okay.
and I speak to this from our perspective, not from an industry-wide perspective. I think you are going to start hearing a lot of things about a lot of unified platforms. And like a lot of other unified platforms in our industry, it's going to be a bunch of acquisitions and white labels that are all knocked together and hope people don't notice that it doesn't really connect on the back end, right? Because these are systems that started off in that hub and spoke environment, and they're trying to move to a unified platform. Whereas at Cloudbeds, we started as an all-in-one, and we are moving to and are pretty much there at more of an open platform, right? So it's like trying to get to the same place, but starting in two different destinations, right? I think their road is a lot harder. So I think you're going to see a couple of things. I think you're going to start to see PMSs evolve from being specialized accounting systems to being growth engines. We're not used to thinking of the PMS as a growth engine, right? Growth engines are RMS systems. Growth engines are cool booking engines. Growth engines are everything else but the PMS. I think that's going to change.
Wow.
I've talked on previous sessions with you guys about causal AI and what we're doing with what we're calling revenue marketing, right? Tying together revenue and marketing. But it goes beyond that. It gets into this idea that from our perspective, if you think about that hub and spoke, we've got the PMS at the middle and then all the other systems on the outside. My perspective is we actually need to mirror that image, put all the other systems, because there are certainly plenty of use cases where you need all of those other systems. All those other systems in the middle, and then the PMS is truly an interaction layer that sits above, takes data from all of those different systems, and then has the right AI built into the platform layer that can turn data into actionable insights. And to use a phrase that's overused, the right message for the right guest at the right time. In other words, when your front desk staff is checking a guest in, they don't need to know the guest's Instagram history. They just need to know the guest had a birthday last week. Hey, belated happy birthday, whatever it is, right? Or they have a birthday coming up next week, whatever the case may be. And so it's a system that can take all of this data from all of these different systems and show it in the system at the right time without compromising UI and UX.
Yeah.
I think fair, Josh. I think the reason you said overused term, the right message, right time, right place, it still hasn't happened yet.
Kim.
Right. Kim, I mean, that's what I was thinking when you were saying that. I said,
yeah,
Kim,
and I was, thank you. And I was just thinking that your vision is that the property management system is going to now stand for the people matter system. and to see that evolution kind of happen. This has been a wonderful conversation. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. You're going to be joining us again soon for our next series, which is redefining the digital storefront. Without giving too much away, how does this PMS conversation connect to the bigger discussion around direct bookings, distribution?
Yeah, absolutely. So when and this ties into what I was just saying, when you start to think of the PMS as a growth engine and how that works, right? That is exactly where you start to think about that larger discussion around direct bookings and distribution. Because instead of the PMS being a passive recipient of bookings and what's happening in the distribution space, the right PMS will now be an active participant in helping to drive those direct bookings, in helping to make sure that you're distributing the right rooms at the right time, at the right rates, to the right people, right? And so I think that, again, just a fundamental shift in how we think about PMSs and what technology PMSs are using. And that's where, the right type of AI is going to come into play, not just slapping on generative AI or something like that, AI washing, but actually using smart AI infused at the platform layer. And that's exactly where PMSs start to enter the conversation around direct bookings and distribution.
All right, and we'll have more coming up from you, I believe, on May 8th. But for now, it's a wrap of today's episode on Dojo Live. Thank you so much, Josh Graham, for breaking down the evolution of PMS and a bit on the all-in-one versus hub and spoke debate. And I'm just left with that meme of why not both, right? It certainly sounds like the future of hospitality tech lies in a more flexible and integrated approach. Before we go, if the audience wants to know more about Cloudbeds or connect with you to see what you might do for them and their properties, how can they go about doing that?
Absolutely. Well, cloudbeds.com, available 24/7. I'm not quite available 24/7, but josh.graham at cloudbeds.com. Yeah, look forward to talking to folks soon, or just track me down on LinkedIn and send me a message there.
All right, awesome, fantastic. Thank you so much again, Josh. Thank you to our sponsor, Ancora, and my co-host, Sridhar Padmanabhan. These conversations
great to be here.
are made possible. Yes, and if you enjoyed this conversation, do follow us at dojo.live. We've got our website and all of those socials: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, Spotify, and more. And talking about what's next, join us next week for our episode number 3 of the series. That's going to be Tuesday, April 1st at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, as we dive into how seamlessly connecting the PMS with the rest of the tech ecosystem unlocks, here we are, Josh is going to like this, the better guest experience, right? That's with Jeff Bizdaka, who is the president of Happy. So until then, stay curious, stay innovative, and bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.